I bought this pre-built from Corsair in 2020. This was when it was impossible to get your hands on a 3000 series GPU, and it was the only way I could get a hold of a 3080. Since then, this PC has served me well, with no real complaints, except for one. It's massive. I mean, no doubt, the 4000D is a great case, but I'm wanting to use it as a living room PC, and this is just not gonna fit. So that's where this comes in, an ITX case that can also fit full-sized ATX motherboards and other components. So let's take it apart and see if we can downsize this PC without rebuying everything. Later on in the video, we'll talk about this video's sponsor, Squarespace, but for now, let's get started. Of course, the first thing I've got to do is take apart this pre-built. This config that I bought has an RTX 3080 and an Intel i9-10850K in a MSI ATX motherboard cooled by a 240mm AIO, along with 4 additional case fans. Now, those fans are not going to fit in the new RTX case, so I'm not going to worry about pulling those out right now. Removing the AIO is a little tricky here, as there are just a ton of wires for it because of the RGB. And I've got to give Corsair props. Their pre-built is really well put together and has great cable management. I kind of feel bad even taking it apart, but I want to give this PC new life, so I think it'll be worth it in the end. All right, the only component that I won't be able to transfer over is the power supply. Although the case I'll be using can support an ATX power supply, it can't accommodate both an ATX motherboard and an ATX power supply together. It just won't fit. Therefore, I'll leave those cables there for now and use it in a different build on another day. Okay, so the case that's going to make the conversion possible is the sunny side up Meshroom S. This case has huge compatibility to the point where it just feels like it shouldn't even be possible. Still, it should fit everything I have here. The side panels use these push pins, which are pretty tight the first time you pop them out, but you do want to be careful because these steel panels bend pretty easily. So what you can do is push from the inside to avoid bending the corners. I have accidentally bent them a few times and they can be bent back, but you know, save yourself the headache and just try to be careful with them. To get this case ready, there are a few things that need to be removed first. So I'm going to take off the entire front panel. This will make it much easier to install that large motherboard. There are a ton of screws that keep this on. I think I counted something like 16 or so. So you'll want to keep a container nearby to not lose these. I'm also going to remove the slot cover on the back, as I won't be using that either. Then the side fan bracket and the PCI Express riser cable. We're going to need a longer one for this build. Before we start putting this thing together, we need to install this PCI Express card bracket so that we can secure it with the new riser cable later, and then move the GPU stand toward the front of the case. We'll need to use 2 standoffs stacked in order to get the bracket at the correct height. All right, now we can finally start putting this thing together, and I'm gonna start with the PCI Express riser cable. So this is a 38.5 centimeter cable that should reach our PCI Express slot on the motherboard. Unfortunately, this is not the ideal orientation for the connector. Ideally, we'd have the cable going straight out towards the back of the case instead of the front. Then we could bend it 90 degrees and it could go through the pass and back up to the PCI Express slot. Unfortunately, I just have to wrap it around the right side. Not as good looking, but it'll work. Okay, there's one additional standoff that needs to be added to the bottom left to support the motherboard. Now let's slide the board through the front and align it with the standoffs. Now there's only 5 standoffs to secure it instead of the 9 you would typically find in an ATX case. Still, that should be plenty to keep the motherboard secured. Next up is the radiator. So let's flip the case over and install it at the right back position. We can feed the tubes and the water block through the top of the case and then secure the radiator to the right side bracket. This was a little bit tricky to work in, but once I had everything aligned, it was no problem securing it into place. While we're still on this side, we can install the 3080. And don't make the same mistake I made here. If you need to use the included 90-degree HDMI cable with your card, plug it in now before you secure it down. I had to take the whole thing apart after I shot this build so that I could plug it in because the HDMI port was blocked by a bracket. The card should slide right into the riser cable we installed earlier, and then we can secure it to the bracket with the 2 screws. Squarespace's flexible website templates and asset library make it super simple for you to start your new site. Squarespace has what's called the Fluid Engine, a next-generation design system that makes it even easier to customize every detail within your template. Adding content is as simple as clicking a button. Just choose a type of content block, such as text, video, or audio, and place it where you want on your page. The Fluid Engine allows you to create unique designs and turn stunning design templates into a personalized page tailored just for you. With Squarespace's cutting-edge design and world-class engineering, It's easier than ever to establish and own your online presence. Visit squarespace.com/DevinJohnston to start your free trial today. Squarespace is also offering my subscribers 10% off their first purchase of a website or domain. All right, let's finish the AIO installation. So I need to reinstall the 4 standoffs. Apply some thermal paste, and lower the water block onto the CPU. Whenever you're installing a water block, it's good to tighten the thumb nuts in an X pattern to get a nice even pressure across the CPU. My Corsair logo is upside down now, so I'm just gonna pop off the faceplate and flip that around as well. All right, things are really coming together now. So I'm going to install one fan bracket on the right side of the radiator to fully secure it. And there are just a ton of wires for this AIO. I'm not too worried about RGB for the radiator fans. I'm only gonna hook up the fan cables and tuck the RGB wires away for now. Then I'm gonna plug in the USB for the AIO. The one component that I'll need to buy for this build is an SFX power supply. Like I mentioned earlier, it can't support the ATX one from the pre-built alongside the ATX motherboard, so we need a smaller one. I'm going with a Corsair SF750, which should be more than enough for the system and uses braided cables that will make cable management much easier. Let's lower this down to the bottom left side of the case and secure it with the 4 screws. Then plug in our giant 24-pin motherboard connector, and I'm just gonna kind of let this hang across the front. Then we'll need to plug in the CPU power cables, so I'll route those across the right side of the case. And while I'm here, I'll plug in that PCI Express riser cable. And I'm really not happy with this cable. I really wish I had one that could go up from under the motherboard. It would just look so much better, but I'm just gonna have to make do with this one for now. And now we can plug in the 3080 with 2 8-pin connectors. I'm actually able to wrap the cables around the side of the motherboard because the design of this board has a cutout that gives just enough room to close the front panel. If you're working with a different board, you may need to route them across the back. Then we can also plug in the SATA power for the AIO. Now let's reinstall the front panel, and this also has our USB-C and USB-A case cables attached. So once that's secured, we can plug those in across the right side of the board along with the power switch. And with everything now plugged in, we can pop the mesh side panel back onto the case, and that's the build complete. It's shocking how much can fit in this small 14.9 liter case. I was able to fit almost everything I needed from this massive 48.6 liter 4000D into a case that's nearly 70% smaller. The case fans couldn't make it over, and I needed a smaller power supply, but still, that's really impressive, and it's gonna give this PC new life. As for thermals and noise levels, CPU temps have slightly increased in the new case by maybe 3 or so degrees, and noise levels only increased by 2 or so decibels. Overall, pretty negligible and worth the trade-off in my opinion. There are definitely some compromises to consider as well though. Just because you can fit an ATX motherboard doesn't mean you get to utilize all the benefits that that board offers. The power supply is going to block the lower PCI Express ports and other connections on that side of the board. My pre-built used a PCI Express Wi-Fi adapter in one of those ports that I also was not able to bring over. Now, it's not a big deal for me because I plan to use Ethernet with this PC, but something you'll definitely want to keep in mind if you were considering this. There's also the option to buy an extension bracket and aluminum feet so that the case can support a 360mm radiator if you need it. So I want to know what you think. If it was me and I was building an all-new system, then I would probably still go with an ITX motherboard in this case. But if you're wanting to downsize, like I did here, then I would make sure that all the components that you have in your current build would fit in this case. So anyway, thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.